All right, Chris, we're back. Another episode of what we are calling the Bully Pulpit. I think that name could be a TBD also. We might come up with something better over time, but let's say it's the Bully Pulpit for now. Yeah.
So I'm
And
Chris Matola.
please. Yeah.
I'm Chris Matola, a political consultant for 40 years, 11 U.S. senators, 8 governors, 7 presidentials, and uncounted scar tissue.
And I'm Justin Schoenfelder, the founder and CEO of Fantasy Elect, who is always just incredibly entertained to do this with you. I love it. So, all right. Listen, we are the day after the New Hampshire primaries, and I think that there's a lot to glean from that for anybody who's playing our contest right now. There have been some points scored, so let's jump right in. I think we should start with New Hampshire. Let's revisit our over unders from last week.
Sure.
Actually, I think you were really spot on. Trump may have actually overperformed your expectation a little bit, but I think you were 100% on with Haley. I think you almost nailed it right on. Any big takeaways on the relative strength going into South Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, I think that nominate. I mean, barring somebody having a stroke, I think the nominating process is over. And whatever, and it's not just the number of votes that Haley's going to get. What happens now in this process? Again, I think I mentioned I've done 7 major presidential, and funding is a really big issue because a major candidate like Haley, can continue to get funding with loans, but they have to be paid back. And the history of presidential campaigns like John Glenn, Alan Cranston in California, were well over a decade paying back their loans from failed presidential runs. So if you're, not a candidate, but think about all of a sudden you went to Vegas for a week and you ran up, 30 grand on your Amex, and, your debt pay over time has kind of run out, and that becomes your life, paying back that debt. And so candidates don't want to do that, obviously. And so a lot of times candidates will say, you've got this much cash on hand, you've got this much, this is a manageable loan, because it also costs money to wind down the campaign, because people have contracts, staff have contracts that have to be fulfilled. There are tax payments, there are legal fees, there's all kinds of shit that you don't even think about. Contracts on rental offices that you might have had, and that's usually a fairly significant bill, or how about it's not an insignificant bill. And so you have to pay that off. And so, and if you're looking at, a 1 in 50 shot of winning the nomination or going $10 million into debt, it's easy to say, I'll see you later because I'm, 53 years old, or I've got another 4 shots at this. So, right.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that. I saw an interview with Haley and Sununu. I guess it was on Tuesday evening. She was asked, if you don't win, are you dropping out? And she said, we just dropped a 4 million ad buy in South Carolina. So, I think to your point before, I think she overperformed where she would have if Christie had stayed in, right? Mm-hmm. She didn't really capture Republican voters, which is what she's going to be facing pretty much, except for a couple other states, right? So she captured independents. So the question is then, and this goes back to my question about DeSantis, which I think my kind of subconscious was onto it. He dropped out before New Hampshire, which you and I said probably unlikely, but does she drop out before South Carolina as she's staring down, to a week and a half, 2 weeks away, whatever, it's February 7th or something like that? Does she get out beforehand and try to get some of that 4 million ad buy back and close her campaign? Or is she running on Koch brothers money now and waiting to see? I saw somebody said her strategy now is to stay in long enough to see if the Supreme Court does rule that he's not able to run. based on the 14th Amendment, or he's convicted of a crime. Because that would certainly, if she's the only one still in, it would probably give her a huge leg up at a contested convention, right?
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, I don't know what ballot access, and I don't know how much ballot access she has, and I don't know if she can just suspend her campaign, because there are costs with remaining on ballots, and again, not big, but it's a calculation. Does she drop out before if she's going to get humiliated? I think she does. I mean, here's the thing with all these politicians now endorsing Trump. The number one rule of politics is power. It's not principle. It's not ideas. It's power. And so if you're endorsing Trump, what do? Well, you look at the polling in your own state, and you look at the polling within your own party, and you say, well, this guy ain't losing, and so it becomes an obvious choice. I mean, let's throw it back to odds. I mean, if you've got, well, yeah, I mean, if you've got a 50 to 1 odd on a particular bet, it's an interesting bet to make, but not with your career. I mean, I'm willing to make a 50 to 1 bet on something that doesn't matter to me, and drop $100, drop $10, whatever it is, and see how it plays out. It's kind of fun, but I am not going to play a 50 to 1 bet with my career. And so these people look at their polling and they say there is no upside to not endorsing him.
Yeah, there's no room for dignity in politics.
And you can say, well, Trump is, and you can say, well, Trump is a horrible person and he's bad for the country and blah, 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 blah. And that's a different calculation. But I would submit that all politics, regardless of ideology, is always about power and being elected first. And that's the history of it. I mean, there's a really interesting piece that happened this morning, or actually yesterday on CNN. Abby Phillips, who's a reporter anchor, who's very sharp. And she said, you basically have two 80-year-olds running against each other and nobody wants them. And the first party to get rid of their 80-year-old is going to win, which, which is frankly, kind of doing the emperor has no clothes bit. But it's demonstrably a good take and a true one, because I think it's like 70% of Republicans and, almost 70% of Democrats wish there was somebody else. Right? Doesn't mean they're not going to vote for the person, and so she said it, and you would have thought that, she accused somebody of being on Epstein Island. And, the kind of the partisan hacks and the paid, the paid bloggers lost their minds over what's a fairly innocuous and true statement. And, they were attacking her. You're spreading misinformation. Nobody means zero, and this isn't zero. And you go, what the fuck is the matter with you people? And again, and because there is no upside for them to say, yeah, that's right. She's right.
Exactly.
Because it's like,
it's interesting that you say. Yeah, it is a very interesting perspective. I mean, there are two things that really tie into that. I saw today, I think it was today, Kayleigh McEnany on Fox. She made the statement that last night was a good, I'm going to paraphrase, but basically a better showing for Biden than it was for Trump. And the reason being, as the exit polling came out, only 10% of those who voted for Biden said, only 10% of those who voted in the Democratic side said they would not vote for Biden in the general if they voted against him. But 7 out of 10 Haley voters said they would not vote for Trump in the general. So her point being, and this ties in, I think, to Abby Phillips, is that the odds are looking better that, yes, nobody wants either one of these. And I have a second question I want to tie into that, but the odds are that most people don't want either one of these people. And probably nobody from this generation. People want a younger generational leader. which was a good argument on Haley's behalf. I don't think that she was the one that people were looking for, but I think that was a right way of framing it. But if it is going to come down to those two, you know, Dean Phillips, who had, we will talk about him in a minute, who had, I think, an exemplary showing last night, really overperformed. His argument has been Biden can't win, but it actually is starting to look like no, there's just a very loud, a lot of oxygen in the room for Trump. But if the choice comes down to the same choice in 2020, people are likely going to choose the same because it is still the lesser of two evils in their mind. And whatever their calculation of what makes evil, I'm not saying literally evil, but the least bad choice.
Yeah.
Is there some validity in that? If I have to play the odds, am I going to play Biden in the general against Trump?
Yeah, I think you do. You know, and I think that, you know, there's an old joke that, you know, campaigns always run their last campaign, win or lose. And as a, you know, somebody that works on campaigns for a living, trying to talk a candidate out of like, well, this is how we won last time, and you kind of go, this isn't last time. But that's usually a huge fight in campaigns. And I've gotten fired off my share for saying, no, you're not right. That's, you know, it's not the same thing. But so, you know, the Biden people say it and they say, oh, we know how to win this. You know, the external factors they have now are the economy, which, you know, people are now seeing improvement. They're feeling it's improved. It is the economy, which we talked about last session. We talked about how people perceive the economy. And, you know, and they're feeling a little better about themselves. And that helps Biden. And if it's just stasis, if all things being equal, it's difficult to see where Trump picks up votes that he lost last time. I mean, I don't know where those votes are. Now, I will say that the Trump people, the three of the smarter people working in American politics today, Chris LaCivita, Tony Fabrizio, and Tim Saylor are all working for Trump. And if there is going to be a path, they will find it. You know, but the earlier question is, does Haley stay in to get a leg up? I think that you can suspend your campaign. You don't have to drop out. You don't have to say, I'm not running. I'm going to suspend it and see what happens. You know, frankly, if I was Haley right now, and, you know, and this is, but again, I'm a burn the bridge behind you guy. And if I was Haley right now, I would be running media in South Carolina that showed both Trump and Biden acting, frankly, like they've lost it and mistaking things and confusing things, and say, you know, is this who you want running the economy and whose finger you want on the nuclear button? You know, I mean, again, it would blow up the world, but that's what she needs. She needs to blow up the world. You know, and she was also. I always felt she was running too conservative. Yeah, and if she does that, you know, she's not going to get invited to shit after anywhere. So, you know, she's going to wind up being, you know, a CEO or a president of a small liberal arts college in the middle of nowhere, if she does pull that off, if she does do that. You know, but can we talk about the kind of what's become, I'll call it the inevitability of Trump? Yeah, let's do. I talked to a very smart guy last week who, name I won't use, but a guy I've worked on a lot of campaigns with. And he was peripherally involved with one of his friends was working on DeSantis and was talking about what a disaster the DeSantis campaign was. And so I talked to this person, and also I talked to a few months ago, I was talking to somebody that is involved with one of the Trump super PACs. And they both said the same thing about how dumb the whole DeSantis strategy was, because the idea that you can make this a binary choice out of the box and say people go, oh, okay, I'm going to do this. And it's like the people said, oh, you have to go attack Trump. And it's exactly the opposite of that. You needed to move people in degrees. So, for instance, and knowing that Trump is in the Republican primary right now, let's take Iowa because it makes sense. The Trump was a 5-1 favorable, and so it's somebody that Republican voters like. And if you're trying to persuade them, you don't start out with, "Hi, I'm Ron DeSantis, and this guy sucks,"
right?
Because people like him. Starting out and saying, "I'm Ron DeSantis, and I built a bridge and repaired a superhighway in a week, and I reformed welfare, and we have no state income tax." And if you told that piece of the story, you're not affecting Trump at all. Trump is still at his 5-1, and he's still beating you, by 40 points in a ballot test. But you moved your favorables to a position where you can now have a little credibility. But here's a guy that nobody knows attacking somebody everybody knows and likes. And so voters go, you know what? Fuck you. And you can never recover from that. Campaigns really underestimate the amount of positive they need to do and the amount of narrative arc. There was a lovely phrase that my buddy Mark McKinnon uses, and he calls it architectural narrative. And architectural narrative has a long tradition in a lot of disciplines. But basically it means that all campaigns have victims, villains, heroes, and actions. It's either implicit or explicit, but it all exists. The more you can define those 4 components, the better off you are. And the one that people always leave behind is the hero component. Who are you? I'm the hero. And so what people do, and if you look at modern political advertising, or a lot of it, it's all like, grainy, shitty, black and white footage with, red type, and it says, the border, a crime, or whatever the fuck it is.
Right.
January 6th. And what they're doing is they're putting the villain at the centerpiece, not the victim, which would be taxpayer, be citizen, be whoever you are. And they're not putting the hero there. The hero has got to be the part that comes first. If somebody knocked on, if somebody knocked on your door tonight and said, you know what, I can save you, 30% of the taxes you paid if you hire me as your CPA, you would say, get the fuck out of here. If you wrote a book about how to save you 30% of your taxes as a CPA, and you went on, you turned on CNN and you were there, and you turned on, Good Morning America and you were there, and the guy knocks on the door, you would go, oh, you're the guy from TV that did that. Why don't you come in and see if you can here's my, here are my receipts for my taxes. You would do that. And so people forget that is a process you have to do. And campaigns, and I think the media too, are so in a rush to get into the conflict part, which is kind of the fun part. They forget the building part. So I thought that was a really interesting insight coming from 2 very smart political consultants, almost 6 months apart.
I think that's really interesting. And immediately when you said the thing about the hero, the victim, the villain, and the action, I thought how brilliant, because in so many ways, Trump has positioned himself as the hero and the victim. And not only has he positioned himself as both of those, but he's positioned himself as the scapegoat victim, as an idol of the victimhood of all of his followers. So I am your victimhood. They're really trying to attack you, but they're coming after me. So what an interesting, if you look at sales, if you look at storytelling structure, it's a really good way of hijacking someone's brain to associate with you, and you become their like external identification in a way, right? So I mean, people have talked about him playing the victim a lot and whatever, but he also positions himself as the hero. You know, when I was there, I was looking out for you. I was building the wall. I was stopping the border. I was doing this. And he says, well, I'm going to do that again. And I'm going to be your retribution. I'm going to be your hero against those villains. We're going to get, you know, we're going to get justice for you, is what he's saying. If you play it in a kind of higher level, what he really says is, I'm your retribution, but whatever. It's really interesting how he's done that, to your point.
Yeah, and also if you look at what he did last week after Iowa, his speeches, the actual content of his speeches were essentially laundry lists of policies. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to cut that. I'm going to do, you know, it was I'm going to do this and that. But you know, it was a bouillabaisse of you know policy, and whether you like it or not. But it was the hero action part. You know, and again, I mean, you know, that for all the craziness of the Trump campaign, it has been the most classical and disciplined of any campaign out there. And which is really kind of funny to think about, because you think of Trump, he's just winging it. But if you look at the arc of the whole campaign and exactly what they did, you can see how smart it is, and frankly, how traditional, how classic it is. And you know, and I think that's gone over, you know, the head of everybody. Which by the way, the Trump people are more than happy to let that happen.
Right. It also makes me think of Abbott here in Texas, how he's portrayed himself now as a hero, standing up to the government at the border, taking action. We're being victimized by these policies and this invasion. And now he's positioned himself as, you're being victimized, I'm standing up against the villain. It's really interesting. Now I can layer that on so many actions that politicians are taking, and it seems so fitting.
Yeah, and if you look at, I mean, the board, it's a great example. And if you look at, you know, Abbott with the border, that, you know, securing the border in Texas has got to be what, a 90-10 question.
Right.
So, you know, and, you know, which is another consultant joke, you know, I'm going to have the courage of my 80-20 question. You know, and so it's got to be a 90-10 question down there about security, or, you know, 80-20 at worst. And so basically he's on the 80% side, you know, picking fights with the 20% side. And, you know, any politician is going to do that forever. And if you want to dissuade them, and this goes to politics and governance, that if you want to dissuade a politician from taking a certain action, you've got to flip that so it becomes not popular and not in their best interest to do. Because again, politics is about power and getting elected, because, you know, you can be a darling ideologue, and if you're not elected, you don't have any power and you can't do shit. So, you know, there's a practicality to it. You know, at a certain point, you become unethical. But, you know, but the idea that as a politician, I am going to do something popular that people will like, you know, that isn't selling out. That's why you elect them.
Yeah. It's also, so earlier when you were talking about nobody wants Biden and Trump, and I said, oh, there's something else that makes me think of. I think so there's a really interesting dynamic at play there, where nobody wants Kamala either. So she's very unpopular as a vice president, and how much that plays into people's calculus when they think this guy might not survive a full 4-year term, and what the dynamics would change if Trump picks very astutely picks a quality vice president, right? So
yeah.
Because a lot's been said about them being around the same age, and you think, okay, well, Trump probably is.
You know, I think the next most important decision the Trump campaign will make, and probably the most important decision they make this cycle, is the VP pick. Because if it's somebody you go, I could see that. I mean, you know, if and it won't be, but I'll throw out, if they said Mitt Romney, you would go, fuck yeah, right? You know. You know, I mean, if they pick somebody friggin' crazy, But if they pick somebody normal, I mean, it becomes kind of compelling because you kind of have to look at the actuarial tables and say, if I vote for Biden, I'm really getting Kamala, and if I vote for Trump, I'm really getting Marjorie Taylor Greene. You kind of go, no, I'm not going to do that, or whoever it happens to be.
Right.
Uh, you know,
Right. Right. That's why
uh,
I think Stefanik is a really interesting choice as a woman, especially. I think, she could, I don't know how well she would do. She doesn't have name recognition, but she could help with suburban soccer moms in that independent kind of swing vote area. Um,
yeah,
and she
I
has a
don't
track
know
record of
if
being a rather moderate Republican
I don't know.
previously.
I don't know. I don't know if that. I think that. Yeah, I think that and they'll test it. They test vice presidential candidates. Um, which is why you wonder. I mean, if you read there was a book called Lucky, and I can't think of the reporters right now, but they also wrote the really excellent book on 2016 Hillary campaign called Shattered. And kind of the Biden people were kind of backed into Harris. Biden. Some people wanted Stacey Abrams, but apparently there was some, I'll call them personality conflicts, and the fact that she had run a terrible losing campaign for governor previously,
Mm.
and he really wanted Val Demings, who I think, by
Mm.
the way, would have been
Florida,
terrific. I
right?
mean,
Wasn't she the former
yeah,
sheriff and then she became a congresswoman and stuff? Yeah.
she was. I believe she was raised by a single mom, and she was actually a beat cop. She was a police patrol person, and
Mm.
and kind of went to school and graduated, and has a great family, and is a moderate, and she's serious, and articulate, not in a what they used to call in the South, as Jed Clampett used to call it in the South, speechifying way, but she's
Mm.
articulate in that she talks the way people talk, and she talks the way people think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's and but what she didn't have going for her is she was not a DC insider. She was not
Mm.
politically connected. She didn't go to the right schools. And
Mm.
and Harris had all those things, and so it became an easy push for her. But I think if
Mm.
it had been Demings, I think we would be talking about President Demings right now,
Mm.
because Biden would not have run. Because again, I mean, the only
Right.
reason Harris isn't running is because they think she can't win, and I think they're probably
Right.
right.
Oh
So
yeah.
so
I think
it's really, because usually there is an old joke that nobody votes for vice president. Nobody's ever voted for vice president, and that's largely true. We've never had two 80-year-olds running against each other where, again, you look at the actuarial table and it's either going to be death or 25th Amendment. I mean, that the odds are pretty
I
high.
I would also argue that that also happened where we voted for vice president in 2008. I think Sarah Palin cost McCain the election. I think for a lot of moderate people, they saw Sarah Palin and they were like, "What the hell is this?" At least I mean, I don't know that he would have won. Okay, I don't know. I mean, it seemed
Yeah,
like
he would
Obama
have won.
was on a tear,
I
but
did
it
the
does seem to me that Palin weakened him quite a bit.
I did the McCain campaign. He wasn't going to beat Obama in 08. Nobody was going to beat Obama in
Mm.
08. But I think that she was not a net
Am I wrong
asset.
that Palin weakened him? Okay.
No, well, she didn't help him, and the campaign had to spend a lot of time putting out her fires. Um, she may have not have been handled well internally within the campaign,
Mm.
but the first thing
Mm.
for the first thing about choosing a vice president is the Hippocratic Oath. First thing is do no harm.
Right.
And and so a lot of ways Pence was a really good vice presidential choice because he was so white bread and innocuous, and there were
Mm.
a couple bad comp, but nobody went like, you know he wasn't part of the equation.
Right. Whereas in that same race, by the way, I think it was very astute to pick Joe Biden as a running mate. You're the first black man running for president. So to have like this kind of like very generic white guy as your running mate was a very good balancing act, in my opinion. That was very
Yeah, no, I
astute.
mean, it was an astute. I mean, the Joe Biden at 28 or '08 was still sharp. And,
Yeah.
he was institutional.
Hmm.
Um, and, he was a Senate institution, and he knew everybody and had a big Rolodex, and everybody
Yeah.
kind of liked him. And, I mean, it was a no-brainer choice.
All right. Well, now, okay. So that kind of opens up the door. So think let's talk a little bit about the Senate because I think there have been two things I've seen recently that are really interesting. I'm going to say the most interesting one for last, but have you been following the potential that I think the signatures have been submitted to change Alaska's voting away from ranked choice? Um,
Yeah.
I don't, it looks like they've raised more money. I don't know if it'll pass, but I actually love that, by the way, the for and against, this is what they're called: better elections versus honest elections. Do you know which one supports ranked choice and which one doesn't?
No,
I
I
love how
don't.
both organizations are so like, oh, it's the best possible thing you could do.
No, I'm not familiar. I don't know which one is supporting ranked choice.
I don't either. I think it's better elections is for ranked choice and honest, or against ranked choice, and honest elections is for it. But my question is, so Murkowski's, she just won in 22, so her term ends at the end of '08 or 28. Uh, does she retire? I don't. The only reason I think she won in Alaska was because of ranked choice. I think the Trump-backed candidate, I don't remember her name, the Asian woman. I think that she was they. I think that she was would have won otherwise. I don't know what your take is, but
You mean Palin?
no, no, no.
You tried?
The one that ran against Murkowski in 22 for Senate. I don't remember her name. I have to look it up. Uh, but they were the top two vote getters, and then in the ranked choice, Murkowski pulled it out. Without ranked choice, I don't know that she does pull it out. Um, do you think this? If we live in a if we assume that we're in a Trump Republican Party now,
Mhm.
does Murkowski win in Alaska without ranked choice, or do you think she retires from the Senate
No,
or
well,
runs and loses?
as an electoral mechanism, I think ranked choice is a little overrated because of the
Mm,
assumption that without ranked choice, voters don't vote tactically. And
okay.
that's untrue. Voters will say, well, I'm going to vote for this person because I don't want that person. And
Mm,
that is a decision. And, ranked choice actually puts a more architectural matrix on the thing. It houses it in a certain way that's easier to see. But those kind of decisions are happening anyway. Here's the other thing I will say about Alaska. I've done races in 48 states, and everybody always says, well, it's different here. Well, it's not different here, except for a couple places, one of them being Vermont, one of them being Alaska. And
mm,
and they don't follow, and Louisiana is the other one too. But those things, it actually is different there. And
yeah.
and so Alaska is its own thing. And part of it is being an Alaskan. As
Mm,
part of it is being being a Vermonter, and part of it's being a Louisianan. There's a cultural piece that's really,
right.
really big and important. And Murkowski's dad was a senator, and
Mm-hmm.
he's kind of
Frank,
an
is that
institution.
right?
Yep, Frank Murkowski, and actually, I think she was appointed to the seat when he passed away. Um, but
Mm,
but there was a big cultural piece of that, and as ideological as Alaska is, and people go, "Oh, Alaska, Sarah Palin." Sarah Palin beat the Republican Party. I believe it was the sitting governor in a primary, and then beat the big endorsed bipartisan endorsed candidate in the general. So it was this very kind of, there was a different mentality up there. And it's big personality, the current congresswoman from Alaska. I think they made a big deal because she was the first native that was elected from that delegation. But she's got this huge personality, and Alaska's really about personality and culture and ideology second. Do you understand us? Because if you live in Alaska, you get that check every year too, or is it every 6 months or whatever it is? Right? You get that oil.
I don't know. Yeah, the oil check. Yeah.
And again, it's a different place. And so, does Murkowski survive without ranked choice? I think that has more to do with Murkowski's age and performance than ranked choice. Because again, I think the problem with the ranked choice arguments, and it's kind of like vote by mail and motor voter and DMV vote, is that it's demonized, but it's not understood. Is that these mechanisms were happening anyway. Vote by mail is a great one. Republicans get fucking slaughtered in vote by mail. And what's funny about it is that for years, Republicans banked votes by vote by mail. And that was kind of like a secret Republican weapon. And then they decided it was corrupt or silly or stupid or unreliable. And they decided we're not going to do vote by mail anymore. And the Democrats said, fuck yeah, we'll take it. And so there's a lot of elections, like in Pennsylvania, for instance, in the past election, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's elected. And Democrats swept all the offices and swept all the judicial offices because vote by mail is plus 64 Democrat. So if you're a Republican, before anybody goes to the polls on election day, you're down 64 to, 64 to, 36. You're getting fucking slaughtered. Right. You got to make that up.
That's interesting. All right. So it was Kelly Shabaka, by the way, that Murkowski beat. And she was really strong. I remember because we were running our 22 contests for Fantasy Elect, and that was one of the races that was it was really close. Okay, so my favorite story this week is, and I'm so curious what your take is, Kari Lake and the potential bribery from the state Republican chair in Arizona. I'm just going to let me just start with this. I saw I listened to the audio. I guess she's eating through the whole thing, which kind of, for me, was a little annoying to listen to, but whatever. They said it was a phone call. It sounds like they're in the same room to me, actually. It doesn't sound like a phone call. And the post that I saw was a Trump supporter, and they said it's good to know that she's, basically saying that she's a good one. She's uncorruptible. They're trying to get to her. God bless her, blah, blah, blah. And I thought to myself, I think she's the one recording this. Did you expect her to commit a crime while she's the one recording? I feel like I as I was listening to it, the fact that it made it to daylight, she's obviously the one recording this thing.
Right.
So I just felt like she was playing a role setting up somebody else. Not that guy wasn't doing something very, unsavory, but what's your take? I mean, I don't know. Is this part of my mind was this whole thing just a fucking a ploy for her election bid? Was this a setup? I don't know. Yeah. I'm very curious. I don't know if you've heard the audio or not, but it feels very fishy to me.
I heard it, and my first thought was this is a fake. This is a setup. Simply because, for two reasons. If you've ever read, as somebody who writes a lot, I'm interested in the way people speak. And, if you're unfortunate enough to do a transcript of our conversation, it doesn't sound like that.
Mm-hmm.
There were sentences, and there was stuff that was really explicit in the conversation. And that's not how people speak. I mean, you can find online, you can, order a book of Amazon of mafia wiretaps and FBI wiretaps. And they're fascinating because even when they're talking about hidden things, people's conversations are a certain way. David Mamet won a Pulitzer Prize for his ability to write how people speak. And if you read it on the printed page, it makes like this, I don't know what's going on here. And so there were too many full sentences for me. There were too many grammatically correct full sentences for me to believe it was true, number one. Number two, clearly she or somebody that wanted her, supporting her, recorded it. And, leaked it out to show how corruptible she is. And I think that the third part of this, which is the funny part, is that if somebody is known as being incorruptible, you don't try to corrupt them. Nobody was going to Mitt Romney or John McCain or Bernie Sanders and saying, if you vote this way, we'll give you some money and we'll give you a Nobody's ever doing that because they would say, get the fuck out of my office.
Right.
The idea that they thought she was corruptible means that you're corruptible. I mean, it's prima facie evidence that that's your reputation, that's who you are. But the whole thing, there was something wrong with it. And I was thinking, gee, was this an AI construct? Totally. But again, if you listen to how the conversation is, or maybe it's edited, but the cadence is wrong. It's not how people speak. And it's too clear.
All of her responses are these canned talking point responses. Like, that's just not the best thing for America. And I'm for the best thing for America, which that would be your response if you're recording, right? Like you're trying to get that in. But either way, that makes the thing fake already because one side is giving a performance and the other side is being corrupt. It's already a fake thing, right? I mean, if you're truly, to your point, incorruptible, the moment somebody broaches the topic, you say just like what you said, get the fuck out. Like, are you out of your mind? So,
I mean, unsurprisingly,
I'm so glad. I feel a little vindicated because I didn't know if I was just being overly. I can be maybe a little, not conspiracy theorist at all, but I'm a little jaded. So when I listened to it, I was like, everything in here this whole thing feels canned. It feels like made up. This is fake. And her side for sure was fake.
Yeah, I've been on wiretaps. I've been on phone calls that have been wiretapped, and the way it works is you get a letter at some point that said you've been on a wiretap. Especially if you're not, if you're who they're after, you don't get that letter. You get
right.
You get the feds visit your office and take your shit. But if you were on a wiretap, like I was on a couple conference calls that somebody on the call, I don't know who, was wiretapped, but they say you were wiretapped. And you can get a copy of the wiretap of the thing if you did. And if you look at it, again, the good luck figuring out who's saying what. Nobody speaks.
Right.
And again, I mean, if I was going to offer you a bribe, if I was going to commit a crime, hopefully you wouldn't be fucking stupid enough to do it in a restaurant with other people around and where you couldn't be sure the person wasn't being recorded. And, you would find an intermediary, you would find a lawyer, or you would find somebody that said, hey, if you don't run for office, you would do it, say, hey, Kari, I mean, let's say the Republican Party in Arizona, and this woman is going to get the nomination and she's going to get fucking killed and you're going to kick away a seat. So there is some reason not to want her to run. You would have a lawyer or a college professor or a business owner say, hey, Kari, I know you're thinking about running, and a lot of people think you can win, but a lot more people think you can't win, and here's some data that says you can't win. And if you decide not to run, we would love to have you sit on our board, to sit on our nonprofit, And, even though it's a nonprofit, we're going to pay you $150,000 or whatever the fuck it is. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
And so she can say this is a
And you
wonderful
know what?
opportunity to build housing in Arizona.
Yeah, for sure. Be like, hey, it seems like you may not have a chance to win this cycle, but in 2 years or in 6 years, whatever, and if you decide not to run, we'd love to put you. It's funny that you say that, because the thing that jumped out of my mind was Blagojevich and the way that he talked on that tap.
Yes.
In comparison.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, you can find that online, and if you go back and you look at that, it's like, there's always a joke among consultants when somebody gets in trouble, or and there's always a joke about being wiretapped. And by the way, I always assume that every call I'm on, every email I write is going to be seen by somebody else.
Yeah, that's the only way to go through life.
Right, and especially in politics. But the joke always is, you start talking in really stilted language. No, that would be wrong. It is against my ethics to do something that terrible.
Yes, right. They're out to get Trump, and that's not good for America. It was like, you don't care. Like, come on, nobody talks. You don't truly care enough. I don't believe you. But I swear, Chris, on this post, I read the comments because I am constantly reading people's comments, and every single person was like, oh, I hope she watches out. They're going to kill her. And da-da-da. I'm like, who's going to kill her? Like, she made this whole thing up,
No, and again, if you are, if Democrats want her to run because she's easily beatable. Yeah. I mean, she lost an
demonstrably. Yeah.
And again, I mean, I can't tell you how hard it is to lose an election in fucking Arizona. I mean, as a Republican.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all you have to do is kind of be normal and run a kind of normally decent campaign. And so she loses that and complains about vote fraud and all this shit, and bankrupts the party and comes up with Dick. And it's like, and everybody thinks she's a fucking nut. And it's like, oh, I want the nut to run again. I mean, Democrats are going to do everything they can do to grease the skids to get her as an opponent.
Yeah, this is a story, Chris, that we are probably going to revisit when more comes out, because the problem is, I think it was too cute by half, and yeah. I think that there's more there, and now there's blood in the water, and the sharks are going to really dig into it.
It's a pea brain play,
Yeah.
By the way, so I had a client one time. We're actually not taking a bribe. Became an important part of the campaign. There was a guy, a U.S. Senator from South Dakota named Larry Pressler, who was a congressman in '78, and I think he ran for the Senate, I think in '84. But in 1980, he was one of the ab-scam guys that they came to offer money on, and and the actual video and the transcripts of it, and they recorded him, and they got everybody. I mean, they got all these guys went down in '80 because of ab-scam. But when they went to Pressler, they're talking to him and they're trying to offer him this bribe. And it's really funny because he doesn't get it. And, all these other guys, they're like, hey, there are people who are going to be really grateful if you vote this kind of, and
right.
And all these guys were like, yeah, I fucking get it. It's like, give me the.
Yeah, because they were corrupt. Yeah.
And they're talking to Pressler, and Pressler didn't and he was like, well, yeah, I think if it's a good bill, I think we could probably do it, but we'd have to see it's got to go into committee and then go to, he's doing that whole thing. And he has no fucking idea that they're offering him a bribe, which was evidence of how honest he was. And finally he was like, well, I don't think this is for us. Or I mean, but it was really funny is that they keep on upping the ante. They're like, certain people who are really connected would do really big favors for you. And he's like, I'd have to see the legislation. It's got to go to the subcommittee first. And, it was really kind of charming. and he was a senator for a bunch of terms, and now I think he's might be professor emeritus or something. But he was an interesting guy. He was a Rhodes Scholar, which is kind of interesting, and he wrote a really wonderful book called Plain States Populace. Was his dissertation, and most people's PhD dissertations are shit, frankly. But this was actually a really interesting book about the history of populism, plain states populism. But it was the history of populism throughout the Midwest, and frankly, how progressive it was. So,
yeah, good for him. And it reminds me of the quote: "You can't cheat an honest man." Yep. It's like they don't want anything from you. You can't cheat them. Yep. That's really interesting. All right, let's end it there, Chris. Okay. Let's do, instead of over under, I got a couple of questions for you, and it'll be more like fill the blank.
Okay.
Well, let's do one over under. Over under, Haley drops out before South Carolina. Let's say it's 50% over under.
Under.
Okay, under. Totally agree. Now at least one or two fill in the blanks. Who's the next big endorsement for Donald Trump? Who does it come from?
I don't know. Boy, that's a great one.
Any chance it's Mitch McConnell?
No. Won't be McConnell. Won't be McConnell.
Okay. All right.
There's no benefit.
I feel like there's going to be somebody who, that's true. There's going to be somebody who was toying with that anti-Trump bent, but now the presumptive nominee, there's going to be somebody who caves, I think. I don't know who, but I think there's going to be somebody who caves.
Yeah. All right. How about this? I'll say the next noticeable endorsement for Trump won't be political. It will be a cultural figure. It'll be like Kanye again or something.
Oh.
It'll be a Kanye-esque kind of figure. I'll say
right. Okay. Has like New York Post editorial board or anybody like that given any endorsements of him yet?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, it might be something like that. Another possible one though could be former administration like Mike Pompeo.
Yeah. It could be somebody like that.
All right. There's going to be some interesting. I think we are going to see. I think next week will be interesting. I think we will see at least one interesting endorsement in the intervening time now that New Hampshire's over and he's presumptive. Mm-hmm. Kind of a foregone conclusion at the beginning, but whatever. All right, I think that's another one in the can, as they say. This was Bully Pulpit. We're crushing it, and Fantasy Elect now has contests open. Chris, we're not allowed to play because we have the inside scoop, but we can watch and with entertainment as other people are playing.
Sounds good, man.
I will. I will see you in a week.
All right, Justin. You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.